these paints is that I bought them in the range for the princely sum of £1. Usually I say, you know, buy really good quality things, try and buy the best you can afford. And I saw those for £1. I thought, oh, I've got to give those a try. So I did. In the previous video, I painted these silver birch trees on white paper using the set. And do you know, I thought that was really quite pretty and I love the way it turned out. So I thought, wonder what it'll be like on black paper. So that's my plan. I've got a reference photo of these lovely silver birch against sort of autumn foliage. You could get that or something very similar from pixabay.com, and those are royalty-free photos. I've also tried out the 6 different colours on a spare bit of paper so that I could see what they were like, and I'm really excited to give them a go. What I've done is just put a few drops of water, you could use a little spray bottle, onto the paints, and this pre-wetting really helps release the colour. All metallics, whether they're cheap as chips like these ones or whether they are the pricier version, they all release their colour quite reluctantly, so pre-wetting is a really good idea. The paper I'm using is from Clairefontaine, so it's called Etival. It is a watercolour paper, it's a black watercolour paper, and the good thing about it is that one side is cold pressed and the other side is rough. I've cut it down a little because I really like that sort of long thin format. So what I'm going to do is use masking tape to mask out the trunks. I'll do all the background foliage and get really splishy sploshy with that. I can then take off the masking tape and I'll have to paint in using the pearlescent one because that's the lightest I've got, to paint in the trunks and leaving the dark marks of the bark negatively. So I'll leave those unpainted and they will be the black of the paper. I could just mask out the trunks with masking fluid, but I thought this might be a slightly quicker and a little more fun way of doing it. So using masking tape, because we want the edges of the trunks to be natural, I'm not just going to stick a straight bit of masking tape down. What I'm going to do is, as you just saw, is tear it, oops, so that I get a nice jagged edge, and then I'm going to put the 2 straight edges in the middle and I get that interesting, quite natural edge to the tape. If your masking tape is super sticky, then just put it on your clothes, leg of your trousers, your skirt, whatever, and it will take off a little bit of that stickiness. Oh, I haven't done that quite long enough. Oh well, never mind. Do that and then put the straight edge inside like that. You can do them at slight angles, you can do them very regularly, entirely up to you. If you're happy with your composition, just make sure everything's stuck down, because what you don't want is the paint to start seeping under the edges of your masking tape. This is a really easy way of painting, because if you look, you can hardly see any sort of individual leaves. We can just splash the paint on in the background. We don't have to worry about keeping the trunks clear, and we can have a lot of fun doing that. Avoid using the pearly colour paint because I know I'm going to need that for my trunks, but let's start with the lightest, and I'm going to do more of the light towards the top, just to give a little bit of impression that the light is coming from the top, be darker down the bottom. It's just an impression. I'm just putting the paint onto the dry paper really randomly, and then I can mix in some of the other colours. So you can carry on dropping in the colours as much as you want, just trying to get a nice even balance. You don't want it too stripy, just want those to flow. Because it's on black, I'm not sure, let's move it in the light. I mean, we've got lots of glitter there, but I think it would be nice to go a bit darker. So the top has pretty much dried, and I'm going to just work across it in very much the same way, building up an extra layer of colour. The black shows through more at the bottom. That's actually what we were aiming for, so that's fine, but we want stronger amounts of colour, so I'm going to glaze those there. If your paint's cover and you're happy with what you've got in one layer, well, that's fine. While it's wet, what might be fun to do is to load your brush. So by load, I just mean get some creamy but still workable paint and just do a little bit of splatter, big and small drops into the wet areas, because then you'll get some sort of diffusion, you'll get some specific marks as well. I'll do that with a couple of colours. Now I broke the trunks up deliberately so that I could do like there was some foliage in front interrupting the trunk, so I'm just going to strengthen some. You can see how wet it is if I move that around. We need to let it dry before we peel off that masking tape and then put in a little bit of detail working on the trunks and, you know, a few branches. To check your painting's dry, use the back of your hand, and if the paper still feels cold, that means there's water in there and it's not fully dry, and you really do want it dry before you take off the masking tape. If it's damp, the paper is really likely to rip. If you're a bit concerned that your masking tape is stuck a little too well, what you can do is just warm it with a hairdryer, and that helps release it a bit better. And just take your masking tape off gently. You don't want to rip it off like a plaster, because if it's going to tear your paper, you can stop quickly and then remove it really carefully. What you'll find is that cotton paper tears less than cellulose paper. It's because the cotton fibres are a lot longer and stronger. You see, look, just tore a little there. So if it does start to tear, I'm going to heat it and then come from the opposite direction. Yes, I've got a little tear there, but we can disguise that. Now, I've removed all that masking tape, but I'm quite concerned because I can actually even feel some leftover glue on here. So what can I say? I'm not going to ever use that masking tape again. That glue might actually resist the watercolour. So my plan is to use a flat brush and really creamy pearlescent colour. And what I want to do is paint in the trunks, but leave little marks for where the bark markings are. Let us see if the glue allows me to do that. And potentially, if it does resist, then we'll have to just embrace that and use that as part of the texture of the trunk. The bark marks are fairly horizontal. Oops. But let's try and vary them, because again, nothing is uniform in nature. And of course, I can always do a second layer. Working in layers in watercolour is a beautiful way of working, so we can do that. Might need a smaller brush. Let's get some of this in like this. I quite like the big brush just because it stops me being too fussy, but I don't want this to look like zebra grass. Put in smaller marks and touch things up as required. So once that's dry, just need to make a decision about whether you need to build up a little more of that very pale colour. And I think putting a few more layers on oh sorry, one more layer, just in places would be rather good. And I do think we've just about got away with that funny gluey texture, but God, that was a bit of a shock. The thing is, things will go wrong when you're painting. It's just inevitable. And the thing is not to panic, and you become a real problem solver as an artist. You know, this has happened, the paper's ripped, the paint's not the colour I thought it would be, something's on the paper so it's given me a bit of a resist. Oh, that's a weird texture. Well, all those sorts of things, you just need to come up with solutions of how you can make the most of it. And sometimes you won't be able to. And then you have to say, well, that was a learning experience. But sometimes you might be able to come up with a really interesting solution. And I'm just, can you see what I'm doing here? I'm actually working on top of the under layer to sort of extend that particular shape. And I could even put in some sort of distant, almost very thin, ghostly trunks. I'm just using the edge of my brush. I quite like that. There you go. Wasn't expecting to do that, and I find I learn constantly. That's what I love about painting, is that you do things, you expect something to happen, it doesn't, you find a solution, you get a bright idea in the middle, sometimes not the brightest ideas, but you think, oh yeah, I'll have a go at that, because in the end it's a piece of paper, and sure, if it doesn't work it can be disappointing, but if it does work, maybe that's rather exciting. With that dry, I think it would be fun to get a little more subtlety into these bark markings. I've got a piece of just ordinary watercolour paper, and I'm going to make myself a little scraper. Make sure my dark grey is suitably hydrated. And oh yeah, that's lovely. Look how creamy that is. Really gloppy. Add little marks on top. Not showing up quite as much as I hoped. It kind of needs to be a little bit darker, but that's okay. It will, I guess, just give a little subtlety. And if any of those marks are a little bit clunky, we can tone them down. What I'm doing is wiping the paint along the edge, and then I am going to print just a few thin branches and maybe even fork some of those. Again, it could do with being that little bit darker, but this is what I've got, so that's what I'm going to have to do. And if it goes blobby like it's done there, let's not worry, and we'll just cross things over. The reason I like to print rather than just using a rigger brush or something is I just think where it breaks up a bit, it gives a far more natural mark where it goes thick and thin, whereas with a rigger brush the temptation is always to be a little bit too controlled. And then the final thing I'm going to do is grab that really lovely rich copper, load my brush up, and then put a few splatters fairly randomly, just to give the idea that some leaves are in front of the trunks. You know what I just said about being a problem solver and coming up with ideas? Well, in the 2 seconds that's taken to dry, I suddenly thought, on white paper we sometimes do scratching out to reveal the white, say you've lost the sparkle in the eye, and I wondered if you could do the same on black paper through these metallics to reveal the black underneath. And look, you can. So I've just got a little scalpel and I'm just gently scraping in, And this would always be the last thing you do because you're really scuffing and damaging the paper. I could scratch out a few of those lines so that we've got two different darknesses of branches, these little thin branches. Can you see? I really like that. Well, I'm feeling quite smug as a good idea. Right, I won't go too far with that, but yeah, scratching out, it works. Now I'm going to carefully remove the tape around the edge and just be ready to stop if it starts to rip. There, let me tilt it so you can see the shine, is my super shiny birch forest, which actually I think is quite cool, and I'm so glad I did those little finer branches. Let's grab the one on white. That is very different. I do like the drama of the black, but you know, they're just different. But we have basically two birch forests on black and white paper, all from my £1 metallic watercolour sets.